greatest discovery that we can make is after we've lost our identity. That small piece of wisdom is what I learnt at the age of 7 years old. I was in the school sickbay, my right arm completely wrapped in band-aids. Now, I didn't fall over, I wasn't involved in a scuffle, nor was it a sporting injury. What happened was that a fellow classmate of mine decided to draw with a pen on my skin and utter the words, "Your skin looks as dirty as the black ink." It felt like I was suffocating in my own body. I remember rushing back home, standing in front of the mirror, tears streaming down my cheeks. In that moment, I knew of two things. One, that I look like an absolute wuss when I cry. And two, and more importantly, I never wanted to feel the way I was feeling in that moment ever again. My name is JAHIN TANVIR. I recently turned 21 years old, and my ambition in life is to be a torchbearer. As a first-generation migrant born in Dhaka, Bangladesh, I've had instances growing up in this country where I felt very confused. Am I going to fit in? Will I ever make it like the others? Does my voice even matter? But that young migrant had people to support him, and here I am today. I want to use my lived experience with racism and discrimination as a vehicle to highlight that your lived experience is powerful enough to make others resonate with your story. That our collective struggle can catalyze concrete change. That if you have an idea or identity worth spreading, you're old enough to speak it to truth. Now, when I think back to the time when I felt so disconnected with the world around me, I realized that the crux of my dissatisfaction wasn't necessarily because of the insults or abuse. I mean, as a kid, it did hurt a lot, trust me. When I think more deeply into it, I realized that I was challenged more so by the confusion that I felt. You see, I moved to Sydney, Australia from Dhaka, Bangladesh in the early 2000s with my parents. I started my schooling in Australia, and that's all I knew. We would go back to Bangladesh every 2-3 years for a few weeks, and that was my only exposure to my motherland. So as you can tell, I didn't really have a strong connection with Bangladesh. In Australia, I learned the language, paradigms, culture from scratch. And so I thought this was my world, my bubble. This is my everything, because I was so overwhelmingly immersed into it. However, when it came to how I was treated, I was singled out because of the color of my skin and because I looked Bangladeshi. So get this, I didn't fit into the Australian culture because of how I looked, and I definitely didn't fit into the Bangladeshi culture because of my time away and learning of the Western culture. So my question is, where do I go? And that is the identity crisis that many young people of color face to this very day. The dichotomy of being from 2 or more different countries, but not fitting into either one. The notion that we are systematically designed to feel different and foreign by intersectional factors we have no control over. And that is affecting young people of color in more ways than we acknowledge. In Australia, 1 in 5 school students face racism every single day. On a national survey of more than 2,000 people, research found that 82% of Asian Australians face racism and discrimination from their workplace and educational institutions. In the same research, 81% of Australians from Middle Eastern backgrounds reported the same, and 71% of Indigenous Australians reported the same. These statistics are shocking, but unsurprising. Now, when it came back to my situation and how I felt, I wasn't openly identifying as a Bangladeshi at school. If anything, I thought I was similar to all my peers. They liked cricket, I liked cricket. They watched the same shows after school that I watched after school. They went to the same classes that I was sitting in right next to them. And so I was confused as to where this racism was coming from. I wanted so desperately for them to see me as them. I wanted so desperately for them to feel comfortable with who I am. I wanted a sip of that acceptance. I wanted desperately to fit into the mold that they were made of. But the danger that I was falling into was that I was losing myself and all the sacrifices that my immigrant parents made in the process. Here I am, losing it all in the fickle process of temporary validation. And that needed to stop. I was very unhappy. And that's when I came across a 3-word principle that my younger self created, and over the years, through my adolescence and adulthood, enhanced. A 3-word principle that I call my triple C's. And my triple C's are anything that I come to whenever I feel that my identity is being challenged, whenever I feel somebody might be attacking me for who I am, and to this very day, I come back to these triple C's. Why I want to share this with you is because I want young people of color, or anyone from any multicultural background, to have the foundations, tools, and moment-by-moment practices to use anytime that they feel that they are being inflicted with racism or discrimination. I want them to feel equipped, just like they would with any other issue. So the triple C's. The first C is called courage. And courage to me is one of the most important traits that we can spend time in investing. Courage by definition is doing anything that's out of our comfort zone, anything that scares us. And what scares us? Change scares us because we have an inertia against doing new things. Conflict scares us because we overthink situations and what might go wrong. But to overcome any adversity, especially racism or discrimination, we need to have the courage to speak up. To look at the lack of representation and say, hey, if no one else is saying anything, why can't I be the first? The courage to overcome the darkness and be a torchbearer. The second C is consistency. And when I talk about consistency, I don't mean it in the sense of doing the same thing over and over again. When I talk about consistency, I mean doing the same thing over and over again, but also understanding how that makes you feel and what you can do to improve it. Consistency not by repetition, but by the ongoing discovery of understanding what something makes you feel and what you want instead of that. To be consistent is to be firm in your values, but it also goes the other way. To consistently stand up for other people. Because we all know how it feels to be discriminated, attacked, or challenged. Why would we want someone else to feel the same way? And finally, the third C that I came across was communication. To communicate is to openly acknowledge who you are, but also acknowledge where you come from, all the emotional turmoil, all the struggles, everything that made your identity where it is right now. To communicate unapologetically about your identity, about your values, and what you stand for. And also, it goes the other way, to communicate whenever someone else is being challenged. Because we don't want this trend of racism to continue and exacerbate. We need to stop it from becoming a culture. And we can't do that if you remain silent. To communicate is to speak up. And ultimately, inside of all of this, the main lesson that I learned is it doesn't matter the color of your skin or where you come from or the language that you speak or what you look like. your diversity is a superpower. We need to consistently initiate dialogues about racism and discrimination. We need to have the courage to get over the awkwardness and fear of the topic. And most importantly, we need to communicate and have a back and forth dialogue about solutions and counteracting them. It's not going to be pretty, and to be frank with you, I don't think it ever will be when it comes to this subject matter. But this needs to happen. This conversation matters. Because there are millions of young people of color right now suffering from this who need it to matter. I want to commit to an Australia and a world where young people feel empowered by who they are, never limited. For them to look at themselves in the mirror and instead of saying, "Why am I so different?" to instead look at themselves in the mirror and say, "I am different, and here's what I will contribute to the world." Thank you.